Hi, everybody. Oh, man. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. Welcome to episode 1 of the Mingle project on YouTube. And as the title suggests, I hope it's the start of something that we can do on a regular basis because it's important work and the nation needs it. Anybody who has listened to me on SiriusXM or watched me on CNN knows that when I say Mingle project, that's shorthand. It's shorthand for my view of the causes and prescription for political polarization and societal disconnect. And you can watch my full briefing, we call it the Mingle movie, on YouTube. It's a 1-hour presentation that I made in 2024 to a sold-out theater in Asheville, North Carolina. In short, I see the nation as lacking in shared purpose. Like, no longer do we have the we're in it together mindset, which I think is the result of no longer sharing common experience. And this was not always my view. I didn't get it. For years, I've spoken all around the country about political polarization. My old thesis primarily blamed the media. I would make my case by tracing my own talk radio background and discuss the changes that I've seen. When I got started, it was all local hosts. And then syndication in the 1990s meant that a handful of hosts now reached national audiences, and suddenly ideology was king. Local programming was replaced with very partisan, very ideological talk. And then cable TV news launched and took a page from the old AM talk radio playbook. A polarized media, good for ratings and revenue, bad for the country. In talking about polarization, besides the media, I've also cited the lack of campaign finance reform. You know, politicians, they spend too much time raising money and not enough time breaking bread with one another, not enough time having a cocktail with colleagues. It's easier to demonize somebody when you don't know them. The growing distrust in institutions, that's also driven polarization. It used to be that when a local official would call for a federal investigation, it meant something because we all respected the impartiality of the federal government. Those days are over. Demographic and economic factors, another driver of polarization. And Robert Pape at the University of Chicago, recent guest of mine on radio and television, he links those factors to a rise in political violence. Gerrymandering, another issue, the drawing of legislative boundary lines to suit political interests. Very much in the news recently with Texas redrawing boundary lines mid-decade and then California following suit. And all of that, the media, the money, the lack of trust, the shifts in demographics and the economy, the gerrymandering, yeah, they are causing our divide. But my thesis was incomplete. It was missing a much bigger picture, self-sorting. And my epiphany moment came when I read a story in the Washington Post saying that for the first time on record, more kids are being driven to school in a private vehicle than taking the bus. And I thought to myself immediately, rest in peace, bus number 5. That was the yellow and black that used to drive my friends and me to the Doyle Elementary School back in the day. Reading the Washington Post, I knew immediately that something was being lost when parents drive their kids to school, because when parents drive kids to school in a private vehicle, it's one less chance for social interaction. It's one less chance for friendship and personal growth. That bus was a great place to mingle. Mingle, a word so old it was used by both Chaucer and Shakespeare. And when I use it, I mean casual social contact with friends or strangers who are often dissimilar to us. Mingling today is in short supply, and the nation is suffering. The person who really saw all of this coming before smartphones, and I keep thinking about him, is Richard Louv. 18 years ago, I had my first encounter with Richard Louv when he published Last Child in the Woods, Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder. And in that book, he links the lack of nature in the lives of today's wired generation to rises in obesity, attention disorders, and depression. How appropriate then that Richard Louv is my first guest. Richard, thank you so much. I really enjoy your work. I hope that that's obvious. And I got to say, you were prescient. You were ahead of your time. What got you started down this path?
Probably personal. You know, I spent most of my time as a boy outside in the woods with my dog, whose name was Banner, and My parents often did not know where I was, but Banner always knew where I was. And so it comes from that. But like you, I saw a lot of studies coming out. And this was in the late 90s when finally people began to study how much time people spent in nature, or more importantly, the benefits of that to physical health, to mental health, to cognitive functioning, all of that. And there were only about 60 studies I could find at that time that dealt with that issue, that question of both the disconnection of people from nature, but also the benefits of that. How could something so large have relatively so few studies? There wasn't much attention being given to it. So that's where that came from, both the personal and watching as a journalist. And by the way, I just watched your movie on your website, and it's terrific. I think you're articulating this better than anybody now, and I appreciate it.
Okay, but I gotta say, I feel guilty in the movie a year ago recording that in North Carolina in not singling you out. I honestly, in retrospect, like, you're the guy who saw it all coming, and I think that you deserve the recognition of being so ahead of your time. When you speak of the nature deficit disorder, what is that?
Well, you don't break out in spots. It's not a known medical diagnosis. What it is a phrase that helps people talk about this thing they've known was true for decades. At least 3 decades, people have sensed this in their own children, in their own lives. But they didn't really have a language to talk about it. I found that over and over again when I did interviews, is that people were kind of desperate to talk about this, but didn't know where to start. So that phrase, as corny as that phrase is, it offered people a way to start talking about it. But mainly what I mean when I say that is when you look at the studies, and by the way, that's 60 studies, almost 20 years ago, is now more than 1,500 studies.
Wow.
All of which point in the same direction, which is that spending out time outside in nature for kids, but as well as adults, is fundamental to our human development throughout our lives.
What would you say to somebody who is watching us and they're saying, oh, okay, I get it. Richard and Michael, they miss their banana seat bikes and the monkey bar handlebars and maybe the playing cards that they had in the spokes as well, if you remember that whole trick to make it sound like a motorcycle. But what the hell does that have to do with the here and now of where we are in 2025? What would you say?
I would say what the studies show, this is fundamental. This is part of who we are, part of being human beings. It's in our DNA. E.O. Wilson, the famous entomologist who is at Harvard, talked about the biophilia hypothesis. And his hypothesis, which now has been proven, I think, again and again, is that we are hardwired as a species to have an affiliation with the rest of nature. We need the rest of nature in our lives. And we don't do so well when we don't get that. We don't do so well physically, psychologically, in terms of learning in schools. I mean, again and again, these studies show this. So, yeah, it may be a little bit of hey, boomer going on here when people respond that way. But the study shows that psychologically, just genetically, we need that. And I want to point out that this started, there were other indications of this early on that weren't directly related to nature. One of them was, and I wrote, my first book was published in '83. It was called America Too. And I went around the country and I interviewed people about where they were moving to and asked them, are you finding what you moved for? And at that time, massive numbers of people were migrating out of the upper Midwest because of the decay of the industrial towns and cities and into the Sun Belt. What was happening then was that both liberals and conservatives were telling people at that time, if you can't find a job, move. Forget about your connection to nature where you are. Forget about your church. Forget about your sense of connection to your community. Just move, go to Houston and get a job there, plenty of jobs, for about 5 years. And instead of bringing jobs to them, instead of bringing new solar jobs and all of the industries we needed at that time. So we basically walked away from those people. Again, both liberals and conservatives were saying that then. I think that has something to do with the disconnect and the unhappiness that has led us to where we're at now. The other thing that was happening was that the nature communities was changing. When people moved, they often moved into walled cities, what I call walled cities now are more commonly known as gated communities, that were often sorted by whether you like tennis or not. It was sorted certainly by economics. Many of these gated communities had their own cops, had their own all kinds of social services that they didn't need government anymore. They didn't need the people outside the walls anymore. So I think that a lot of this is our connection to nature, which I think is fundamental to our ability to practice democracy. Believe it or not, in order to be good at democracy, as a kid and as an adult, you have to go outside the front door.
Love that.
You have to walk down the street. You have to get to know your neighbors, and not only your human neighbors, but all of the other species that are around us. There's a conversation going on around us all the time, and we ignore it to our peril.
So that's to me the most important part, which is I don't blame the kids, I blame the parents. If the parents aren't allowing, stranger danger is a factor in all of this, and if the parents aren't allowing the kids out to have that free range kind of experience, then the kids are being denied the social skills, like the social skills that come from being on bus number 5, and when they get older, why would we be surprised that they don't interact well with one another? Because my thesis, they've been devoid of common experience. Is that a bridge too far? Am I taking too big of a leap?
I'm hesitant to blame parents because they're suffering from the same thing. We got to remember, we're about 2 generations into people suffering from nature deficit disorder. It's been a while. We also have anti-social media. That further, as you've eloquently talked about, further turns us into factions. You have, yes, stranger danger, the fear of it. That fear was largely due in the beginning, at least, to media, to news media, to my profession, your profession, because we would take, certainly on the cable channels, a handful of terrible crimes against children and then repeat them over and over and over again. That's the very definition of conditioning. At the same time that this was being reported, violent crime toward children was actually going down for several decades. What was going up is violence toward children inside the home. So there are a lot of reasons. Bad urban design. We get told, go for a walk. Take your kids for a walk. Walk where? In San Diego, where I'm at, where it's supposed to, a lot of sun and all of that. If you go for a walk very far, you'll run into a freeway ramp. And that's because of urban design. There are so many reasons for this. And I think ultimately this is the issue that connects us, that crosses ideological borders. Every parent, or most of them, care about their kids. And they don't want to see their kids separated from nature or each other. And early on, when I would sit with groups of parents and teachers, et cetera, they all wanted to talk about this. And nobody brought up ideology. Nobody brought up Democrats or Republicans. They saw this as almost a primal issue that transcended both religious and political differences.
Okay.
We have to have that conversation on a much larger level. And you're doing a lot to accomplish that.
You're nice to say that. Okay, so wipe the slate clean, take our final 60 seconds together, and give me the Richard Louv prescription. What is it that people watching us, give me something tangible that they can do, either for themselves, their kids, their grandkids?
Well, give you a couple of examples. One is, if we're talking mainly about the connection to nature, parents can't assume it's going to happen naturally. I mean, Generation Z is now going outside about 25% less than Generation X. They're spending about an hour a week outside, and often they stay inside because they're bored, they're lonely. Who are you going to go with? What friend down the street do you know? So parents can't take it for granted, and a lot of parents have. So that is part of our responsibility. One of the ideas that the Children in Nature Network, which is the nonprofit that grew out of Last Child in the Woods, which is promoting a new nature movement. One of those ideas is the Family Nature Club. And there's now hundreds of these family nature clubs around the nation and in Canada. What these are multiple families that agree to be connected enough to pick up the phone or put something on Facebook. Anybody want to go with us on Saturday on a hike and take our kids in this group, this club. And so 4, 5, 6, maybe more families will band together to go on that hike together. That has a couple of important benefits. One is their safety in numbers. They don't fear stranger in danger as much. And there are other benefits. One of them is that not all parents know how to pitch a tent or even hike. And so there are other parents,
sure,
though, who do.
Can't thank you enough. Where can people get more of the thinking of Richard Louv?
Well, from my books, and there's several of them on this issue now, but also from the Children and Nature Network, which is childrenandnature.org. And there are a lot of people all over the world now who are working on this, and it is a movement. That's, to my great surprise, it has become a movement.
childrenandnature.org, childrenandnature.org. Richard Louv, thank you. Great to see you. Let's please stay in touch.
Thanks, Michael.
Okay, that's Richard Louv. As I say, he was ahead of the curve. He was ahead of the curve, and only when I had that bus 5 epiphany, did I say, wait a minute, Richard Louv. You know why I said that? I have to just tell you this quickly. And by the way, guys, let's make sure that we incorporate some of the reaction from people who are watching us in real time, because I want to make sure that I'm mindful of the comments that we're getting from our YouTube audience. But when I started to think about bus number 5, I thought about the fact that adjacent to my bus stop was a 12-acre wooded area. And that 12-acre wooded area had, trails and a haunted house and underground forts. And I'm sure this sounds familiar to many of you. Those wooded areas are of critical importance. And I still go to that wooded area because I love to walk in that area in the community in which I was born and raised. You know what I don't see there? I don't see any kids on bikes. Brian Nadeau, this will now be known as SPN, the Smerconish Programming Network. I don't know, Brian. I think we're off to a good start. This is Mingle Episode 1. I'd like there to be a Mingle Episode 2, because if all goes well and if people get value from the message tonight, I'll keep doing it. We'll get together on a regular basis. Hamilton White, we have our 3rd or 4th Central ADK Mingle Group meetup scheduled for the last weekend of September. Everybody who wants is invited. Chuck Hall. Yeah, it's true. He was on bus number 5 with me. Steve, I could count on 2 hands. Steve Slattery. Listen to this. I could count on 2 hands the number of times Mom drove me to school in 13 years, and now it's 70% of kids. I'm the same way. The only recollection that I ever have of, being driven to school was, I don't know, like a day when my parents had to pick me up sick. And don't get me started on that, because absenteeism is a huge issue. And when kids are absent from school, they're not mingling. Okay, I got to stick to my plan here, because we got great guests and a lot coming your way. I hope you're into this. And by the way, if you're watching me live, alert a friend right now and just say, hey, there's something pretty cool going on YouTube on Smerconish's chapter. He's trying to build bridges and put people together by mingling. Coming up, Cannot wait for this. Jim VandeHei, I quoted him on radio and TV. He's the co-founder and CEO of Axios. He just published this amazing 3-part letter to college students, and he's next.
This is Parks.
This is how you all night, 360 hit me, now we're going all in. I can feel it calling, the crowd, the light, the night, the sights, the vibe is right. This is how you, this is
Parks, Pennsylvania's #1 casino experience. This is how you win.
Hey, it's Michael Smerconish. You might know me from my daily radio program on SiriusXM or my Saturday program on CNN. What I'm seeking to do is build a centrist alternative in contrast to those well-known media platforms that seek to benefit from fomenting ideological divide. In other words, I think our nation's been driven into a partisan ditch by the media, and I'm trying to demonstrate a different path, one that speaks specifically to those who don't feel represented when there is only two-party choice. After all, a plurality in this country tell Gallup they are not Republican, they are not Democratic, they are independent. Here on YouTube, you will see daily contributions. They might be commentaries, they might be interviews. They are usually focused on political news and other current events, and weekly chats that I have with YouTube followers. Please subscribe and share it with a friend. Thank you. Jim VandeHei is the co-founder and CEO of Axios. I love what you wrote recently. Thank you for being here. And Jim, welcome to what I loosely describe as the Mingle Project. And here's what the Mingle Project is all about. The Mingle Project is me saying that the core of the problems that we face as a nation is that we have no shared purpose. In other words, no longer a feeling that we're in this together. And I attribute that to a decline in common experience. Everything is so fragmented, from our politics to our television programs, and somehow we need to have and restore common experience. First, gut check to what I just said.
100% agree. I think the moment that you had the deterioration of institutions, right? So think you and I are similar ages. When we were kids, you had the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, churches, unions, community groups. You just had a lot of areas where we overlapped and you had to share a common space. A lot of those have broken down. A lot of them have lost trust. Then you have the rise of social media, which I think amplifies the very worst of humanity. And I don't think it reflects the reality. I do think, like most people, fundamentally are normal and good, which I'm sure we'll get to, but I think that gets lost. And we're in trouble when that happens as a country. I'm sure it's why you're doing the project. When people don't feel a sense of patriotism, don't feel a sense of common purpose, bad things happen. And usually that bad thing flows from apathy. It just flows from, out of hell with it. Nothing works. I'm going to worry about myself and I'm not going to pay attention to that. Well, that is the American experiment, right? You don't pay attention to that. That deteriorates. And at some point, it can crumble. I'm not saying it will. I don't think it will. I think there's many, many beautiful things about the country that will sustain it. But there's nothing written in stone that this is meant to last forever. And it is a precious, precious gift.
I'm worried about the nation. I'm most worried, most concerned about our youth, which is why I invited Jim VandeHei to be here, because you recently published in several parts a message to college students. And you begin by saying to them, you've been duped. How have they been duped?
I think they've been duped, and you've seen it really powerfully in the last couple of weeks by the media in part, but by social media. Like, algorithms of all the big platforms are designed to amplify the people with the biggest followings in the loudest mouths. It creates the appearance that everybody's nuts, that everybody's at each other's throats, and that everything is hopeless, when in fact, most people aren't on social media all day. Very few people watch cable news. Most people are going to Little League, going to church, and living normal lives. But you don't see any of that anymore. So if you stick your head into the social media machine, you'd think we all lost our marbles. You'd think we're on the verge of an authentic civil war. You would think that the fate of the nation is dire. And it's just not true. It's just not true. That the thought exercise I've done with my kids, and one of the reasons I wrote this, I have two sons in college, a daughter who just graduated. And so I talk to them a lot. I talk to other people. The thought experiment I always give people when they're like, I don't know, I think people are nuts. I'm like, don't trust me, trust your own eyes. In a given year, you meet 150, 200 people that you have close enough proximity to make some appraisal of their character. Are they decent people? Would they help you shovel in a snowstorm? Would they carry an elderly person's groceries in the door? Do they give money to causes? And almost everyone would say, yeah, that's like 95% of the people I meet. Well, you know why? Because that is actually 90 to 95% of the country. It's the other ones who've gone batshit crazy that make it seem like we all are.
Amen. Quote, but what if I told you that most people in the real world aren't obsessed with politics, aren't glued to MSNBC or Fox News, don't download X? Most people are the opposite of that. They're normal. But the problem, Jim, is that the business incentives that exist for people who do primarily what I do for a living encourages the incendiary, and the normal ones for whom the issues are a mixed bag and are not looking for clicks and eyes based on being a divider. The business incentives are there for those at the polar extremes. What do we do about that?
Yeah, I mean, first you have to recognize it, which I think now everyone is. I
Right.
think with the
I agree.
tragedies we've seen, I think people are realizing that, listen, now that we know how social media works, and we know how an algorithm works, and we know that we all have a negativity bias. This has always been true. It's hardwired into our species that we just react more viscerally to things that are negative. It's just how we are. So if you're getting negativity pumped into your brain, no wonder when you're staring at that, you feel a lot worse about yourself and you feel a lot worse about society. Part of it is just realizing we got a huge problem. And I think it is an epic, epic problem. It is a societal cancer that needs to be cured. So then how do you cure it? I think once you have that realization, listen, the social media companies aren't going to change your algorithms. Politics is Newton's law. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So you can just assume that the politics of the last 25 years is going to be the politics that you have. So the way that it changes, and the reason that I have hope, if you look through history when we've gone through periods like this, it's normal people. It's not big cities. It's not big government. It's people realizing we have a problem. We're individually going to rise up and take some self-responsibility. And I think everyone needs to own their own behavior. Then those people unite. And I don't know what that looks like, but that is where salvation will come. That is where I think normality will be retained. And the fact that it goes back to the beginning of this conversation, the fact that most people are they are normal. They do love their country. They just want to live their life. They don't want to be in constant conflict. That should give us hope. So then the key for you as an individual is, how do you spend more time with those people? How do you spend more time thinking about that? And part of it is like, shut off your account. Don't participate it. Don't share nonsense. There's little steps that all of us can take that if we did it collectively, you would bring the temperature down almost instantaneously.
Okay, so let's get to the ask, because here's how I verbalize it, and you and I we're channeling one another with I think installment 2 of what you recently published. I say, in the end, you can do something. What can you do? Be like your parents. Go join. Go participate in whatever form that might take in your community, or my shorthand is to say mingle. I mean, I think about my parents' experience, and whether it's my dad's rotating poker club, or mom being in bridge, or dad refereeing high school football, or mom volunteering for a community group that built as group of women a hospital of substance in our community. Seek out a way that you can give back and be among people and get offline. What is your ask?
Well, I think that's perfect, right? Like I've never heard a single person say, man, I really feel like crap because I volunteered at a soup kitchen.
Right.
Man, I feel bad about myself because I read to a kid who's struggling with reading. Do those things. And I think participation is at the key of it. You got to unite at the community level. You've got to engage with people, get out of your house, get off of your screen. You live in a beautiful country at a beautiful time. Be part of that. But in addition to that, I do think if you are an active participant in social media, which is most people and is most young people, you've got to learn how to use it responsibly. No one's going to make you use it responsibly. And using it responsibly means stop following people who say stupid things. Stop sharing information that you don't know where it came from. When you are participating in social media, be clinical. Don't be emotional. Take time to actually read and think. There's more good information available to you for free at scale online than at any point in humanity. Seek out that information. Think a little bit more deeply. Be part of the solution. And you can, because one of the things I talk about over and over with younger people is like, you control you. Like, I have no tolerance for whining, none. You get up, you decide what you're going to read, whether you're going to pray, whether you're going to meditate, what you eat, how you're going to react in a bad situation. Do you do something kind for someone else? Do you think with gratitude about all the people who've touched your life in a positive way? Or do you sit there and doom scroll? Like, you control that. And I do think that personal responsibility is a big, big piece of it. We all have tremendous opportunity. I get so frustrated when I understand why people are down right now. I don't understand just empirically how you could say, like America's like never been worse. Like, no, it's actually never been better. Like, this is the crazy thing.
As you say, America rocks. I'm going to read one paragraph aloud, and then I'll let Jim VandeHei go. You say, invest in friends. There's a reason most people who study how to both live long and live happily agree. And I'm thinking of that book, The Good Life, Waldinger and Schultz. Obviously, you've read it too. Social media is often artificial, airbrushed, and empty. Dedicate substantial time to people who really know and like you. You'll be able to better understand and even persuade others if you do. Attend church, go to a synagogue, pray at your mosque, host a dinner, call, don't text a friend, and better yet, visit them, says Jim VandeHei. You get the final word.
And look at that Harvard study. Look at any person who's studied, like, how do you live a long, happy life? They all come to the exact same conclusion, that deep relationships are the key. Almost, and many think more important than what you eat, whether you exercise,
Absolutely.
Where you live, what your genetics are.
Yep.
Like, there's a magic that comes from it. And we become a pretty isolated society. And the phone sits at the heart of that. But all of that is fixable. And that's why I always return to and try to get people to realize that, yes, in the moment things feel bad, but if you look at the country, you've never really had more opportunity. Every other nation wants to be us. The coolest technologies like AI are being created in our country, not others. We have the great protection of two shores. We have abundant energy. Like, shame on us if we don't figure this out. Shame on us if we don't figure out how to work our way around social media and some toxic politics. And get back to doing what America does, which is like kick ass and do it in a way with real confidence. And imperfect, sure, always has been imperfect. Stop comparing it to heaven. You're on earth. You got to compare it to other points in history and other nations, and you got it pretty good.
Jim VandeHei is the co-founder and CEO of Axios. I look forward to mingling with you again soon. Thank you, Jim.
Awesome. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Fabulous.
Thanks for what you do.
Just great. Thank you.
This is Parks.
This is how you all night 360 hit me. Now we're going all in. I can feel it calling. The crowd, the light, the night, the sights, the vibe is right. This is how you. This is
Parks, Pennsylvania's #1 casino experience. This is how you win.
Hey, it's Michael Smerconish. You might know me from my daily radio program on SiriusXM or my Saturday program on CNN. What I'm seeking to do is build a centrist alternative in contrast to those well-known media platforms that seek to benefit from fomenting ideological divide. In other words, I think our nation's been driven into a partisan ditch by the media, and I'm trying to demonstrate a different path, one that speaks specifically to those who don't feel represented when there is only two-party choice. After all, a plurality in this country tell Gallup they are not Republican, they are not Democratic, they are independent. Here on YouTube, you will see daily contributions. They might be commentaries, they might be interviews. They are usually focused on political news and other current events, and weekly chats that I have with YouTube followers. Please subscribe and share it with a friend. Thank you. By the way, new set. Digging this? Okay, we just switched a couple of feet. My next guest knows what it means to take on entrenched systems and actually get results. Gretchen Carlson, the journalist, the co-founder of Lift Our Voices. You got to find out more about that organization. It's really important. She turned her own experience of being silenced into a movement that ended forced arbitration and restrictive NDAs for millions of workers. At a time when Washington can't agree on much, she built rare bipartisan coalitions to pass not one but two landmark laws. and she joins me now. Gretchen, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for joining this mingling opportunity. I heard you say something the other night on CNN so spot on about the need for people to reintegrate and find common purpose.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Michael. I'm all for mingling. I mean, I'm all for compromise. I've been a registered independent my whole life, and I really believe that America is craving this right now. I can't tell you the humongous response I had to that appearance on CNN from all different kinds of people who said that they felt like they don't belong anymore in our country because there's just not a party for them. And I've heard this over the years, but I think it just happened to really resonate with people after the shooting of Charlie Kirk, because it seems like we're giving so much attention to the fringe factions instead of concentrating on the 90% of people who are somewhere in between. They all agree this was a horrible situation, a travesty, but we don't want to focus, or so many people don't want to focus on the fringe. We want to get back to, how do we heal this country? How do we find peace in this country? How do we leave a country to our children? That is what you and I had, Michael, growing up. I fear for that. I know you have adult children. I have young adult children. I don't even know what to tell them anymore.
I so agree with you. And I have to also note that you've said workplaces should be places where people can thrive and not be silenced. And you've heard my whole Mingle thesis is that America needs more opportunities to actually talk to one another. I wonder how you can relate your work, NDAs, forced arbitration, that shut down that kind of honest exchange in the workplace.
Yeah, so as you know, 9 years ago, I came forward to say that the former chairman and CEO of Fox News, Roger Ailes, was allegedly harassing me, biggest decision of my life. I was about to be silenced by something called a forced arbitration clause, which basically means that you can't sue, you can't go to court, which is your Seventh Amendment right. I knew nothing about that. I'm a smart, educated person. My lawyer said at the time, you don't have a case because you have this clause in your contract, and you also have a non-disclosure agreement. They came up with a strategy to be able to make my case public, or we arguably would not have been in the Me Too movement at all. But this is what's been happening to thousands and thousands and thousands of workers, especially over the last 4 decades. The reason we haven't been hearing about these cases is because they were all going to secrecy, into forced arbitration and NDAs. And what that means is that we're not talking openly in the workplace. I think, with the Me Too movement, one of the most instrumental parts of it was that the American public got mad because they were like, wait a minute, I thought we were treating people better at work these days. But the problem was they were made to think that because these cases were all going into secrecy, and so they weren't being talked about and they weren't being covered. And when America realized, oh my gosh, we're still treating people poorly at work and we're covering it up by silencing them, they got angry. And so I transferred into this whole area of advocacy work to try and change the laws. Never thought I'd be doing this work. But if we become more transparent at work, we can solve these problems instead of hiding them. We need to own them, stop silencing people, fix them, get rid of the bad actors, save the courageous people.
Well, I know one of the questions that you often get is how in the world, in this climate, did you pass not one but two bipartisan laws in what most of us see as this hyper-political time, the most of our generation? How did you get that done?
Yeah, so I think that my number one lesson that I've learned is that a vote is a vote is a vote is a vote. I mean, you cannot just go only to people who you think are going to agree with you. And that's kind of the way we live right now, right? We only watch what we want to hear. We only read what we want to know. And so we continue to separate ourselves. Well, the strategy I used when I went to Capitol Hill was, maybe I can get that person. Like, why wouldn't I at least try to get a meeting with them and see what they think? And what ended up happening, Michael, was that, I mean, I'm not by any stretch making this sound easy. It took me 5 years to get 10 Republican votes to get over the filibuster in the Senate to pass the first law. But I went to people and I was surprised sometimes that they supported me. I'll give you examples. Senator Josh Hawley, one of the most conservative people on the Hill. The minute I met with him, he said, I'm with you. I might have never gone to his office. That was how I got his vote. House Representative Matt Gaetz, who's no longer in there and had his own share of problems, also said, I'm with you. Never would have thought that I would have gotten Matt Gaetz. So the lesson here is that you have to be persistent and persevere. Lessons I learned growing up in Minnesota by very good parents who taught me that. But you can't just assume that we're going to stay in these silos and that you can't convince somebody that they might be on your side. And that's eventually what happened. Biggest lesson that I've learned is don't shun people just because you don't think they're part of your conversation.
You used the word silo. Most importantly, what I wanted to discuss with Gretchen Carlson is how we get people to have a more broad-based media diet. You know, so many are siloed, far left, far right, that's all they know. A news story might break, and if an outlet chooses not to cover it, they might not even know or be any the wiser. And yet, because of the algorithms and what they're fed via the internet, they might think they're well-read, not recognizing they're being given a steady diet of stories that they've shown a predisposition toward liking. So I guess my direct question for you is, how can we get them to sample more, change the dial, and take in more opinion?
Yeah, I mean, the other biggest lesson I've learned since leaving Fox, was change the channel.
Change the channel. Amen.
Change the channel.
Yeah.
Like see what else is going on out there. But I'm a little pessimistic about this because I do think that people stay on brand. Like, if you're only a Fox viewer, it's kind of emblazoned into your big screen now, or if you're only an MSNBC viewer. I actually think that I know this wouldn't be good for ratings for both of those operations, but we may have to start thinking about what's good for society. And I would actually put it out there to both of those entities to try to just do a segment that shows how the other side is looking at this, just to give your viewers a sense. I talk to a lot of people who say, oh, I flip around because I want to see what the other side is talking about. That's the point I'm trying to get at here, is that you're not going to hear it if you only stay on the same channel. So maybe it's up to you to change the channel, but maybe it's up to these entities to at least do a segment like, let's show you the other side.
Yeah, I'm not holding my breath for that either. I don't go to bed without using that remote. I want to know what I feel like I can't deliver a radio program in the morning if I haven't sampled what everybody is saying at night. You get the final word. You're so gracious to be my guest. I appreciate you very, very much. What do you most want people to know tonight?
Oh gosh, that I am optimistic. I wake up every morning with the advocacy that I do now. I mean, I have to wake up positive with the glass half full, but we have to remain optimistic about the future of our country. We can't just throw up our hands and say, what the hell, we're not going to have any movement in the direction in which we want to see that makes us feel better. We have to be a part of it. We have to be active. We have to have our voices heard in whatever capacity that is. But we can't give in. We can't. We have to persevere. We have to wake up optimistic. And we have to do this for our children.
Gretchen, where can people go to find out more about your current work?
Yes, so my nonprofit is liftourvoices.org to learn all about my legislation and the work that I'm doing to make workplaces more transparent and safe, or GretchenCarlson.com if you just want to know more about me.
Thank you, Gretchen. Wish you good things.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay, more live reaction. We're doing it live. We're doing it live. More reaction on our YouTube debut for episode 1. Joseph Abrams. Is it just negativity, or is it a great question, or is it a deliberate attempt to divide us because that makes for more engagement? I don't think that it's necessarily deliberate, like let's pit them against one another, but you've often heard me say on radio, angry is over, which is kind of wishful thinking. Anger sells, hostility works, and although there are more, I'll be presumptuous of those who are watching, there are more of us who reside between the polar extremes. Remember that Hidden Tribes study a couple of years ago? It had an 8,000 person sample size, which is really huge. And I'm doing this from memory, but I'm 98% certain in what I'm telling you. It found that 86% reside between the polar extremes. In other words, 14% are far left or far right. But 86% of the rest of us are somewhere in between. But what do they have going for them, the extremists? Passion. And we can't allow the loudest voices to control all the microphones. That's the takeaway. Bob Mara, I keep hearing about the massive number of people who want normalcy and moderate thinking. I don't believe that's the case. It's just not the case. I think you're wrong. And I think I just addressed that. I hadn't even read Bob's question when I gave that last response. I don't think that's accurate. I think, in fact, that people in the middle are just not as committed as the people in the extreme. The people on the extremes are the one who write the checks and put up the yard sign, volunteer for a candidate, work the polls, while people who are in the middle are, paying bills, raising families, and don't make this their life's work. But it's not going to change until they do. I used to listen to you, Kathy Inman. I used to listen to you 30 years ago. I had hair then. I'm so glad that you're doing what you're doing. I'm glad I'm doing what I'm doing tonight as well. And I'm appreciative to all the guys at Creative Outfit who are making this unique experience. Okay, let's talk solutions. Let's talk about what we can do to restore common experience. Anytime that I speak to the political social scientists, there's none more knowledgeable, by the way, than Robert Putnam, who wrote Bowling Alone. They always cite, and Putnam always cites, volunteerism. In Philadelphia, we have a pioneering day of service on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. It's the largest in the nation. And that's because largely of my next guest. Todd Bernstein has devoted his life to civil rights and public service. He's the president of Global Citizen, the nonprofit organization that he founded 3 decades ago to promote sustainable civic engagement. And prior to that time, he was an aide to Pennsylvania United States Senator Harris Wofford. Good guy. I miss him. In 1994, he helped Senator Wofford and Atlanta Congressman John Lewis create the National MLK Day of Service, which takes place each King Day in hundreds of cities all across the United States. Todd's also the founder and director of the annual Greater Philadelphia King Day of Service, the largest King Day of Service in the nation. Todd Bernstein joins me now. Thank you for being here. And by the way, you're here on like a flyer because I texted you. I think I was on air when I conceived of wanting to do this, and I'm like, Todd, this is perfect. Will you please? And you just said yes without even knowing what it was all about. So I appreciate you for doing that.
Well, Mike, I've known you for decades, and including at the beginning when we were on opposite sides politically. You were an active Republican, me an active Democrat working in a opposing campaign. And I think this is who you have been all the time. We talked earlier today about a time when I remember you being on the air. I think it was just before you went on Sirius. And this is the kind of thing you've been yearning for a long time. Really frustrated with the extremes and the what I think is a sort of a silent majority, if you will, who aren't involved, and in many ways don't know how to become involved. And this is something that I've learned about the whole civic engagement movement. I think that there are a lot of people out there who want to do good, who want to be a part of the community, who want to be connected, but they just don't know how to do it.
Right, and that's why I wanted you here, because as you know, I talk about this on radio, I talk about this on television, and I often get the, okay, you've convinced me. You've convinced me. I now see these disparate pieces of the puzzle as part of a larger narrative. What should I be doing? And I rely on Putnam and the other social scientists. And in terms of the to-do list, at the top of the list is always volunteerism. You heard Jim VandeHei say earlier, right? Nobody ever regrets going and working in a soup kitchen. And when I think of volunteerism, I think of all of your work. Tell the short version of the story. What happened back in '94? How did this all come to pass?
Well, it actually happened in a conversation years before in 1988, 2 years after the King federal holiday was established. I was working with Harris Wofford, a veteran of the civil rights movement, a close colleague and friend of Dr. King. And we talked about, given the struggle and campaign to recognize Dr. King and the civil rights movement, and that for many, this was just becoming a day off,
right?
Particularly for young people, but it was really limited to a certain population: Black folks, those who were directly involved in the civil rights movement. But King was a man of action 365 days of the year, an enemy of apathy. And we talked about how we could bring people together on that day for a common purpose in a community building exercise, to get around a table in a family, in a group, in a church, to talk about what a particular community needed, and who better to be able to define that than the people who live there. And a community could be a neighborhood. It could be a community of faith. It could be a civic association, or a bowling league. And in order to create a sense of empowerment and ownership, you want those folks to engage in that process, come up with an issue to tackle, and then talk about how to go about doing it. So we don't, in the King Day of Service and in the civic engagement work that I do, we don't want to prescribe to people.
Right. Go do your thing.
Yeah, I mean, we don't ever want to say this is the way you do it. Part of the engagement is not just going out and doing it. It's the process before, and hopefully, with the King Day of Service, it's one day. It's a federal holiday honoring Dr. King, but it's about much more than a day. It's about using that as a springboard to a kind of commitment of ongoing civic engagement. And I think there's sort of a misconception. A lot of people will start volunteering because they think that what they're doing is for someone else. And really, as almost everyone finds out, it is as much about the person who's doing it, and a feeling of contributing, a feeling of self-worth, and a motivation to wanting to do more. And that's why I know you've talked a lot about making service a requirement for Americans, whether it's military service,
some form of giving back.
Right, AmeriCorps or the Peace Corps, and AmeriCorps is an endangered species, which is the topic for another program, perhaps. But a lot of people don't know what it's like to be able to contribute to society. And I think that while I would love for the term volunteer to be pure, I think that in the spirit of making civic engagement a part of the curriculum, not forcing people to volunteer, but making that as important as math and science and English, of doing good in the community, of going to a park, of studying the pH balance of the soil, and then getting out in the park and cleaning it up, right? But not just doing it, as Harris used to say, to people, but getting the folks who are invested in the community to be deciding how it should be done, and to have that sense of ownership.
Before you founded the King Day of Service with Harris Wofford,
and John Lewis, the great civil rights icon.
Yeah, no disrespect intended.
No, of course.
You were politically active. So before we shut down, what do you think about, and you can disagree with it, but what do you think about the thesis that I'm offering about our salvation and solution being common experience because of the fragmentation of society spurred by the internet that has allowed us all to seek our own and not to be in the company of people who are dissimilar from us?
Yeah, I think the only way that we really find these common solutions as a society, or in a neighborhood, or throughout a city and state and country, is to find a common purpose, is to find where we have things in common. And as you know, Mike, one of the things that we do is we have these conversations. We have conversations on
the beer summit. Would you please explain your role? Remind everybody.
Right.
I saw Henry Louis Gates Jr. recently.
Yes.
And it all came flashing back.
Sure. In 2009.
Right.
Harvard professor Henry Louis Gates was returning from a trip from China. He was attempting to go into his home. He didn't have his key, and he was kind of, sort of trying to give a little oomph to the door. Skip Gates, as he is known, is black. There was a woman walking down the street. This is in Cambridge,
Right.
Cambridge, Mass.
Close to Harvard, his own house. Right.
His own house.
Yeah.
And a white woman across the street saw him and immediately called the Cambridge Police Department, who responded. Sergeant Crawley came, and Professor Gates explained what was happening, and they got into a heated exchange, and Professor Gates ended up being arrested. So this got a lot of media attention, and President Obama entered the discussion as this was being covered nationally. And he invited both Gates and Crawley to the White House to have a discussion about the incident, how we can kind of better understand each other, and thus it was in the Rose Garden over beer, and it became known as the Beer Summit.
And you carry on that tradition.
We simultaneously, as that conversation was taking place, we brought together 40 people in Philadelphia to have a similar kind of conversation. That was 17 years ago. So, but again, these are hard. These can be very hard conversations. Just because you get into a room doesn't mean that the barriers are broken. And the best thing is to listen, to learn from the other person, and then to share one's own common experience, and not make the other person wrong.
And can I just say, I see nothing Republican or Democratic or independent about any of this tonight, right? This is like a unifying message that everybody ought to be able to buy into, which is, let's spend some time with people who might not see the world the way that we do and try and be civil and see what happens from there.
Right, and so much of it is about earning a sense of trust. And that level of trust is breaking down. I think in many ways it has gotten worse. So I think the challenges in some ways are even greater, but even more reason why we need to have these kinds of discussions, why there's great interest among your audience, your radio audience, your CNN audience, and here tonight. This is something that I think you're on to.
I hope so.
And this needs to be the beginning of a process.
You're nice to say that. Thanks for taking the flyer and coming here for episode 1. If there's episode, 7, we'll have you back. How does that sound?
Love to.
Okay. Hey, by the way, where can people go for more information about the King Day of Service?
Sure. Our website,
or Global Citizen, whatever you want to promote.
Is globalcitizen365.org. The King Day of Service is just one program. We have a whole range of civic engagement programs to get the community involved.
Awesome. Thank you, Todd.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Mike.
it. And thank you to everybody who's watching. Let me just take a quick peek at other comments. By the way, I want to thank Todd Bernstein, and I want to thank Gretchen Carlson, and I want to thank Richard Louv, and I want to thank Jim VandeHei, because they were all extraordinary. I'm just so excited about how this all came to pass. And I want to thank my friends at Parks Casino as well for enabling this and making it happen. Let me just see. Falcon Steph, sadly, one of the biggest problems in our country is low voter turnout, particularly during primaries. More voices help round out the extreme. How do we encourage more engagement? Well, that's so true. And my effort, my personal effort to try and, here in Pennsylvania, open the primary process, because it's so true that people who have microphones hold such sway with primary voters, who are the most ideologically driven, the most passionate. Consequently, they determine who the nominees are. And then for many of the rest of us, we get a choice that's the lesser of two evils, when we show up in November. Steve Slattery, extremes fear compromise more than achieving their own goals. Letting the other side have any victory disgusts them. All I know is that compromise is not a dirty word. You know, compromise is not a dirty word, and I wish there were more people running for office who recognize that. Robert R. says more beer summits are necessary. Bill Dozier, volunteering in your community quickly teaches you that you are the one who benefits the most, which was Todd's point. Okay, here's the ask. Very simple ask. Go join. Join what, Michael? I don't know. Whatever suits you, your family, and your community, but go belong. Go join in the way that Todd Bernstein described and volunteer. You've heard me on radio and on television reflect on my parents. Something I never appreciated growing up was the extent to which, and I'm sure your parents were the same in terms of mingling, participating, being joiners, knowing their neighbors, and being active in their community. And finally, I will say, if you appreciated episode 1, share it with a friend, and that will help drive the odds that there is an episode 2. Okay? See you, everybody.